Gnome blessings, fellow Nomians. Today's episode is about something that really sits right at the heart of the Church of Gnome. Not gnome hats, not gnome folklore, though those are all part of it. Today we're talking about something much deeper, something stranger, something essential, holding space for both the profound and the absurd. Because if you've been part of this community for a while, or if you're just tuning in, you've probably picked up on a certain tension. Not in a bad way, more like a balancing act, a dance. On one hand, we talk about the unseen, the sacred. We reflect on grief, purpose, intuition, inner peace, connection with the earth. We honor stillness, mystery, and search for meaning. And then sometimes we share, post, and laugh about ridiculous things that we've done while dressed up like a gnome, or what it would be like to get our dogs ordained as ministers. And the thing is, none of this is a contradiction. This is the point. From the very beginning of the Church of Gnome, it was built with this as one of the core values, that we can hold space for reverence and ridiculousness, and all that can live together, where you don't have to shut down your joy to be taken seriously, and you don't have to silence your questions to be welcomed in. So, this episode is about balance. It's about what happens when we stop pretending that spirituality has to be solemn all the time, and when we start remembering that laughter is sacred too, because life is weird, people are weird, spirituality, if we're honest, is often very weird. And yet, within that weirdness, there's something beautiful, something grounding, and something true. So, today, we're going to explore what it means to create a space for both the mystery and the mischief, the wisdom and the wonder, for deep, soul shaking truths and moments that make you snort laugh in public. Because maybe, just maybe, those aren't opposites. Maybe they're companions. And so before we dive into all that, I just have one announcement for an update with the church, and that is a new doctrine that has been added. And I call it the Doctrine of the Nomian Beard Rite. And my hope is that this will serve those of you who are looking for support in situations where growing a beard, whether for spiritual, cultural, or other personal reasons, has been challenged. Like in the workplace or something. Some places don't allow you to have a beard, but you can get religious exemptions. So that's what I'm aiming for with this. So, many Nomians, a beard isn't just a look, it's a living symbol of rootedness, wisdom, and patience. And, Nomians that choose to grow one, the beard becomes a quiet ritual, a daily affirmation of your values and beliefs. So, this doctrine affirms that choice as a spiritual expression. It supports your right to maintain a beard in daily life and religious practice, and, in workplaces where a beard might otherwise be restricted. And I know, of course, not all Nomians grow beards, and that's also affirmed and okay in this doctrine. Participation of beard growth is always voluntary, and everyone bearded, clean shaven, or anywhere in between is equally embraced in this community. So, if that's something that you've been waiting for, it's now up on the website in the Doctrine section. So, let's get into it. Let's talk about absurdity as a spiritual tool, the sacredness of laughter, and, about the gnome at the crossroads of mystery and mischief. Let's talk about balancing the profound and the absurd. So, absurdity, not as something necessarily to laugh at, but something to learn from. Because somewhere along the way, absurdity got a bad reputation in spiritual circles. It became the thing you grow out of, the phase you evolve past, as if seriousness is the price of entry for wisdom. But I've found the opposite to be true. Absurdity, well, that often is the crack in the surface. It's that little tear in the veil that lets something sacred shine through. Sometimes the only thing that can loosen up the grip of ego is laughter. Not necessarily a mocking laughter or laughing at someone, but the kind of laughter that bubbles up when you suddenly see how much you've been taking yourself too seriously. That flash of cosmic comedy when you realize you've been sprinting in circles trying to outthink the mystery only to trip over it. It's like a moment in meditation where you've reached that deep stillness, a sense of total presence, only to be jolted out of it by your dog farting. And you know what? That was teaching you something. That was reminding you to not float too far off the ground. Brings you back to the body, the breath, and the ridiculous holiness of being a person. Absurdity humbles us. It reminds us that for all of our wisdom and ritual, we are still creatures with bodies, needs, awkwardness, and contradictions. And if we can't make peace with that, our spiritual life can become brittle. Beautiful, maybe, but too fragile to hold us when we really fall apart. This is why absurdity shows up in spiritual traditions across the world, not as a distraction from the path, but as part of it. You can see trickster figures across mythology. The coyote, Loki, the fool, those who disrupt just enough to let something true emerge. You see it in the Zen koans, the ones that really make no logical sense but somehow land in your chest like the truth. You see it in parables that use exaggeration, absurd imagery to sneak past the brain and speak directly to the soul. And you see it, yes, you really do see it in gnomes. Little bearded figures, red hats, hiding under mushrooms, guarding the garden like they know something we don't. And maybe they do. Because if you think about it, absurdity, that's what makes wonder possible. If everything made perfect sense all the time, there'd be no reason to question, no room to dream, no gap for wonder to grow in. Absurdity breaks the illusion of control. It reminds us that we're not here to master the universe, we're here to dance with it. That's why the Church of Gnome, this is a place where we make space for the strange. We talk about serious things with gnome hats on. We tell parables with punchlines. We bless the silly without needing it to mean more than it does, because sometimes it already means everything. Absurdity, it is a spiritual tool, not because it teaches you how to transcend the world, but because it teaches you how to be fully here in it, fully human, fully flawed, and fully alive. So if absurdity is a spiritual tool, then, maybe humor is how we use it to reach each other. Because in a world that sometimes seems where people are increasingly divided by belief, by identity, by how serious or spiritual they think they're supposed to be, laughter can become a kind of medicine, a disarming, unifying force, a way of just saying that I'm human too. Humor lets us drop the performance. It lowers the walls that sometimes we didn't even know that we were holding up. You can spend hours debating someone about theology, politics, or metaphysics and really get nowhere. But share one moment of unexpected laughter, and suddenly you can be on the same team. In the Church of Gnome, that's not just a side effect of our culture, it's a core value. Because I've seen what happens in spiritual spaces when they forget how to laugh. It gets rigid, fragile, it starts mistaking seriousness for depth. And people start walking on eggshells, afraid that if they bring their full selves, awkwardness, humor, weirdness included, that they won't be accepted. And I want the exact opposite of that. I want you to show up in this space laughing, wondering, questioning, and still being able to be taken seriously. Because I think that's how trust is built. We don't need to pretend to be perfect in order to grow. In fact, sometimes it's the imperfections, the awkward stories, the shared eye rolls, the dumb jokes that maybe go a little too far, those can form some of the strongest bonds. And I've had conversations with people who never would have opened up to me if I'd come in with a sermon or a polished spiritual lesson. But if I said something ridiculous, something honest and a little unfiltered, it gave them permission to be human too. That's what humor does. It tells the truth without making it hurt. It reveals what's sacred without needing to sound holy, and it can keep us grounded. Because at the end of the day, we're all kind of absurd. We're spiritual beings who have, we have to remember passwords, deal with Wi Fi, we poop, worry about taxes, and sometimes, get mad about commercials we've seen too many times. And if we can't laugh at that, I think we're missing something essential. So, whether it's a podcast episode that opens with a heartfelt prayer and ends with a gnome themed conspiracy theory, or a community forum where someone shares a deep meditation insight and someone else follows it up with a meme about a house plant, it's not a contradiction. That's the Church of Gnome in action. Humor is how we can say, I see you, I've been there, I don't have all the answers either. And sometimes that's the holiest thing that we can say. But with absurdity, and it's being the Church of Gnome, I think we also need to talk about gnomes. Not just the cute little garden statue or as a punchline, but as a threshold being. Something that lives at the edges, between realms, between ideas, between what we think we know and what still asks to be imagined. For most people, gnomes are lighthearted, whimsical, absurd. But what makes them such a perfect symbol for this community is that they don't live on just one side of the spectrum. They're not strictly fantasy or strictly metaphor. They can be in between. In folklore, gnomes are often earth spirits, hidden, humble guardians of the natural world, living under roots, behind stones, inside hollowed out trees. Not flashy or loud, they don't seek worship or recognition. They watch, they care, they live close to the soil. And that already says so much, because we live in a world that's become obsessed with the loud, the visible, the epic, and the grand. But gnomes remind us of the power in smallness, in consistency, in tending, in staying connected to what's right in front of us instead of getting lost in the sky. At the same time, gnomes are absolutely absurd. Wearing pointy hats, beards down to their knees, often smiling, slightly mischievous. There's humor built into them, and it's like a secret joke that we haven't figured out yet. Because that's what threshold beings do. They hold the line between the known and the unknown, carry mystery without needing to explain it, and can remind us that the sacred and the silly are not enemies. They live in the garden, a place where roots meet the sky, where wildness and cultivation touch, where decay becomes life again. That's where gnomes live, and that's where we live too. As humans, we're always in transition between youth and age, certainty, doubt, between the person we've been and the person we're becoming. And so much spiritual growth happens not in the rival, but in the in-between. And I think that's why a gnome is such a powerful guide, because they help us hold space for the parts of ourselves that are also hidden, humble, absurd, and sacred. In the Church of Gnome, the gnome is not just a mascot, it's a symbol, a reminder that you don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to be grand to be meaningful, and you don't have to pick between playfulness and depth. You can live right there in the middle. And maybe the middle is where the real magic happens. So I know we've touched on how absurdity can be sacred and how humor creates connection, and gnomes, quiet, strange, in-between beings, can carry some deep symbolic weight. But I also want to make sure we talk about what it means to hold space for other people, especially when their weirdness, their wonder, their way of doing things is different from yours. Because it's easy to create a spiritual space that's serious and structured, and it's also easy to create one that's ironic and completely unserious. But I think what's hard and more rare is creating a space like this, one where people can bring all of who they are, the mystical parts, the skeptical parts, the parts that want to pray under the stars, and the parts that want to make fart jokes and send Bigfoot memes to their friends. That's the kind of community that I want to be part of, and that's what I'm trying to build here with the Church of Gnome. A space where people aren't tolerated, they're truly welcomed. A space where you don't have to prove your worth by how spiritual you sound, where belief is honored, but so is curiosity, where having a sense of humor isn't seen as a distraction from holiness, but sometimes the very thing that opens the door. In this community, you might someone who's been practicing Buddhism for 20 years and someone else who just started meditating last week because they had a weird dream about an owl and now they're questioning everything in their life. You might some people who believe in God, people who don't, and people who believe in something that they can't quite name yet. And all of us can be sitting at the same table, not because we believe the same things, but because we've agreed to believe in something more important than agreement. Holding space for others, it doesn't mean that we have to fix someone's experience. We don't have to interrupt their story to share our own. We don't measure their value by how enlightened they seem. We just let them be and honor what shows up. Sometimes that's a deep grief or a silly question about gnome lore, or sometimes it's a joke that cracks all us open, and sometimes it's someone that's saying, I don't know what I believe anymore. And everyone else can sometimes be like, you know what? Me too. It's not spiritual chaos, it's spiritual capacity. When we stop trying to control each other's process, when we stop deciding what's serious enough to matter, we can make room for real transformation and we can make room for joy. So if you've ever felt like you're too weird, too skeptical, too curious, too intense, too lighthearted, too something to belong anywhere spiritually, this is your reminder that you don't have to shrink to fit in. You don't have to choose between being fully yourself and being spiritually welcome. We're building something different here, something stranger, something more beautiful, because it makes room for everyone's strange beauty. So if you take nothing else from this episode today, let it at least be this. You're allowed to be both. You're allowed to be reverent and ridiculous, to be full of questions and still full of meaning, to laugh in sacred spaces, to honor your beliefs while still holding room for mystery, humor, and all the things you can't quite name yet. The world can sometimes feel like it's making you pick a lane. Be serious or be silly. Be spiritual, be skeptical, be academic or be intuitive. But we're not one-note creatures. We're layered. We're weird. We're beautiful contradictions trying to make sense of this strange and sacred life. And that's why the Church of Gnome exists, to create a space where you don't have to choose, where you can wear a gnome hat and still talk about grief. You can quote string theory and still make a joke about fairy portals, and you can believe with all your heart or not at all and still belong. Because belief isn't about having the right answers. It's about staying in relationship with something bigger than yourself. Something that humbles you, grounds you, reminds you to laugh, reminds you to grow, and reminds you that being human is the weirdest, hardest, most miraculous thing of all. So wherever you are right now, whatever your mix of wonder and weirdness looks like, I do hope you feel welcome here. And I hope that you keep walking your path with both question in your heart and a grin on your face. So until next time, gnome blessings.